the basics are set to normal, and the first long line is 5/8. So the typical hem, which is what you'll be doing when you do any pattern thing, is just a straight stitch. I'm not going to be back stitching because it's just to demonstrate what it'll look like afterwards. So the typical stitch when you are connecting pieces for anything, this is not the bottom hem, but just like side seams, is just that. And usually your item will have you press it flat. Sometimes it'll have you trim it with pinking shears so that it doesn't fray so easily. But that's like the basic stitch. If you want to level up and do a different stitch, instead of pinking it, what you can do is you can keep one as is, which is a typical 5/8, but the other one, trim it to 1/4 inch. If you're not sure what a 1/4 inch looks like, take a look at a ruler, but typically it's just less than half. So what I'm doing here with my other finger, I'm keeping the other side at bay while I cut this one in half. And we're going to be doing the flat fell seam really quickly, just so you can picture it. If this was an actual item of clothing, I would iron it flat. But for today's purposes, because just demo, I just want you to know that you would iron it flat that way. And then you would tuck one over the other like so. And I'll be pinning this one just as you would be pinning it. And when I do a flat fell seam, I like to do the needles parallel so that I don't have to use as many and I get to keep it flat like that. If you did it perpendicular like so, you'd have a bigger gap between needles. And when I do parallel needles like this, I always point them away from the machine. I think I mentioned this the first class, but if you had them pointing like this and you pass it through this way, you'll be going into the machine to remove the needle, and that's dangerous. So for the flat fell seam, this side is going to look the same, but we're going to add a stitch. So it's not invisible anymore, but it's going to hide the seam inside itself so that it won't ever fray. So in a way, it'll make the garment last longer. So if you ever wonder why like Gucci clothing and all that's so expensive, it's because they're not taking any shortcuts. They're doing all the more time-consuming seams, and probably, of course, they wouldn't do like a contrasting color like that. But this is flat now. It's flat on both sides, and it's hiding. You can't get it out unless you seam rip it all. So definitely, this is like a finishing thing. This is not something where you're not done figuring out if you're making the size bigger or smaller. This is like final. This is never going to get stitched again. The other one is I think it was called the Pajama Seam or something. Instead of the colors facing each other, they're facing out. But we're going to do 2 straight stitches, but we're going to flip it. So the first one is closer than 5/8. I'm just going to do it the edge of the foot here. And just like before, I'm not going to demo ironing, but if this was an actual item of clothing, you would want to iron it to make sure. So now I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to stitch it again, and I'm going to try to not catch the previous one. So I'm just kind of with my fingers flattening it, but if you actually use an iron, it would be better. So if you ever do this stitching method, you just have to make sure that you're not eating up too much fabric, because all the pieces you cut in a garment for pattern, they are only intended to have 5/8 of a seam margin. So if you ever made your initial stitch too far, then you would have to make your second stitch even farther, and you'd be losing more fabric. So I'm basically gonna stitch for the side there. And I'm not measuring, I'm just trying not to catch the initial one. I'm actually really far, so probably those two together, it's way more than 5/8. But the end result is that just like the initial one that I made on this side, you can't see anything, but on this side, the seam is hiding inside itself. So both of these achieve the same thing about hiding the edges, but this one sticks out. You would only do this for a soft fabric. This one is flat. You maybe use that for bulkier fabrics. Thank you.